The deal was they saw me, and at the time I was big and I was very ethnic looking as an Italian. Mm-hmm. I think I had a jogging suit on at the time. And the guys in the car had weapons, and their job was to rip me off with the money. But word got back somehow that this guy, me, is a mobster. And I was talking to the bad guy too at the time, and I guess they thought I was from some New York crime family. I don't know what prompted it. But the guys in the car, and they weren't that old, they were in their mid-20s, they went away to a nearby gas station and ditched all their guns. My guys on the surveillance team followed them in, took them down.
Wow. Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, Michael Messier.
Michael, and who did you work for?
Regarding law enforcement?
Yeah, law enforcement.
U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration.
DEA. Okay, so before we get into that, you have a really, really interesting background to me, and I think the audience is going to really find this interesting. Tell me a little bit about growing up, where you grew up. What kind of kid were you?
Well, I grew up in Rhode Island. I was actually born on Camp Lejeune. My father was a Marine, but he was only there for about a year, and then we moved to Rhode Island. So that's why my accent is a northeastern accent. Grew up in a little town in Rhode Island, and it was basically a typical childhood back in the 60s. Played Little League, was in the Cub Scouts, had a paper route. So everything was that type.
Yeah, yeah. So were you a studious kid? Were you into sports?
Yeah, I was a studious kid. I liked school, and I also liked sports. I loved baseball at the time. And then as I grew older, I ended up getting more involved in wrestling.
Oh, okay.
Though I did play football,
Mm-hmm.
but wrestling was my sport.
Okay.
But yeah, I enjoyed school.
How about your parents? What did they do for a living?
My father was a mailman.
Okay.
He was retired from the military, and he was a mailman. And my mother was a housewife, but she was a phenomenal seamstress. She would make dresses. She had a skill that, you don't see too much of that today, where she spent decades creating dresses. She made some people's wedding gowns. She had a skill that, like I said, is hard to find in this day and age.
Did they emphasize to you education?
Yeah, we emphasize education. And quite honestly, in the neighborhood that I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
that was expected. In other words, you had your peers, everybody was talking about going to college.
Okay.
So it was again, everybody was expected to go to college.
Okay. Brothers and sisters?
I have a brother.
Okay.
Jeff, yeah.
Okay. So tell me.
Younger brother.
Okay, younger brother. As you're growing up, is there something that happens? I mean, you don't jump right into DEA and law enforcement.
No.
But is there something in the beginning that kind of sets your mind that maybe you're going to go into law enforcement down the road?
Yeah, I would say so. Just like every other kid, you were watching the, FBI, Efren Zimmerlich Jr. This is the FBI, come out with your hands up. And all the guys come out with their hands up. I mean, it's really that simple in law enforcement.
Yeah.
But also 1 Adam 12, Adam 12 was so you see all these shows on TV and you kind of like, you want to be the hero. You had G.I. Joes when you were growing up. So in that environment, plus playing sports, because I tended to be the larger kid, I was always put in a leadership role, if I wanted it or not. So you were put in those positions of at that time of authority. Mm-hmm. And you saw it, and I thought it was pretty cool.
So that always stuck with you. What age do you think you start? I mean, I don't know, 1 Adam 12. I remember 1 Adam 12, but I don't remember what age. Do you remember kind of what age you started having these thoughts?
Probably around 10.
Okay. Okay.
10, 12, something like that.
Okay, so you don't jump right into law enforcement right away.
No.
You graduate from high school. What do you do?
I graduated from high school, and I went into the military. Now this is back, I'm going to give my age away, but I went into the military basically a few weeks after I graduated. I went to basic training with the Air Force in Lackland. And I entered the military in 1977, which was a few years after the Vietnam War. And in those days, going in the military didn't get you the designation of a hero. People were tired of the military in those days, so I kind of went against the trend. But I went in there because I thought it would be interesting, and I also felt that it was practical because it would help me pay for college. I didn't want to put the burden on my parents to send me to college.
Yeah. So
I decided to do something different. While my friends are in college, I was in the military, but I was looking at the long term. I was figuring, okay, after the 4 years, I would have the old GI Bill.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that plays out.
Well, it's interesting because you and I talked before we started recording. One thing I thought was interesting is you were doing trades actually at a fairly young age. I mean, I think you said your first trade
in the
was
stock market.
Yeah, in the stock market at like 18. How'd you get interested in that?
I don't know. I just don't know. No, but I found it fascinating for whatever reason that the value of a stock had a dollar value to it, and it was worth something, and you can watch it move up and down. So, and plus I had a paper route when I was very young. Now, the audience may not know what paper routes were and paper boys, depending on their ages.
Yeah.
But I actually got up in the mornings on weekends, and after school I would go deliver papers. So I would have a business when I was around 10 or 12 for about 4 years, where I would go out and earn a living, quote unquote, and get compensated for it.
Yeah.
And I just found the stock market interesting. I read a few books when I was in high school and even junior high school, and I just got involved in it. And then when I was in the Air Force, my first duty assignment down in San Antonio, I opened up a brokerage account, and I just made a trade. Eastern Airlines no longer exists, but I made some money in it, and I felt that I was Warren Buffett.
How old were you when you joined the Air Force?
Right out of high school, so I was 18.
Okay, so 18. How many years do you serve with
I
them?
did 4 years.
4 years. When you get out, what do you decide to do then?
Oh, I went in there with one sole mission, was to get out and go to college.
Okay.
And while I was in there, I ended up going to American University in D.C. My last duty assignment was Bowling Air Force Base, which is in the southeast region of D.C., the Anacostia region. It's probably one of the only Air Force bases without an airplane on it. It's more of an administrative base, but there is an airplane, excuse me. There's an airplane that's on a pedestal when you enter the base, but there are no airplanes on that, because you're right across the Potomac River from National Airport, so I would imagine it would create a problem with the airspace.
Yeah.
So that was my last duty assignment. And while I was there, I applied to American and a few other schools, Georgetown, what have you. But American offered me a scholarship and an early admission, so I took them.
Okay. Did you wrestle in college?
That's one thing I regret. I did wrestle in high school. I wrestled in the Air Force. I couldn't fulfill my time wrestling in the Air Force because I broke my ribs. But I wanted to wrestle in college, but for some reason, I just felt like I had to focus more on school.
Okay.
And it's a decision that I regret. So if any kids are in college and they say, right now when they want to, they're toying, should they do the sports or not do the sports? Because you can always work.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't wrestle in college. But I graduated with a degree in economics and a minor in what they call quantitative methods.
Okay, I saw that. What are quantitative methods?
It's sort of like, it's mathematics, and it's also statistics. It's a blend of math and statistics.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So you graduate. What's your first job following college?
Oh, my first job was, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at that point. I had some ideas, and I was looking at law enforcement at the time.
Oh,
but
so you're still, even then. Okay.
yeah, so I was looking at law enforcement at the time, but they wouldn't allow you had to have a work experience.
Okay.
That was how it was in those days.
Well, let me ask you this. Was there a specific agency you were looking for at that point, or you just kind of were shotgunning
I was
it, or
just shotgunning. I wasn't sure where, I was even looking at the DC Police Department. But then I pulled my application from that for personal reasons. But I ended up, I just went into selling cars as soon as I got out of college.
Oh, okay.
It was an interesting route to take.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while because I wanted to make some money. You had to.
Yeah.
So it was fun, but I knew this wasn't going to be a career. This
Yeah.
was just something, a stopgap thing.
Yeah.
But it did hone my skills in dealing with people.
Well, that was a question I was going to ask, because I've talked to another guy that was a car salesman as well. And did it help you with not only your stockbroker career, but your law enforcement career?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it really did, because it helped you, engage with people.
Yeah.
And listen. One of the early things you learn when you're in sales, be it if you're selling cars or you're on Wall Street, you got to listen, because you have two ears and one mouth, so you should listen twice as much, right? But it did help. It was these little elements from these jobs that basically you look at the elements from each of the jobs you had in your history, and they all impact you in different ways.
Yeah.
And I would say it was definitely not a wasted time. You had to pay the rent and what have you, but also you did pick up some traits and some ideas on how to deal with people, which came in very valuable down the road.
Yeah. So when do you actually start working in the financial industry then?
I moved to New York in 1986 or 85. Kind of funny, because shortly after I got my Series 7, I went to work for E.F. Hutton. And if you remember the old commercial, when E.F. Hutton talks,
Yeah, everyone listens.
everybody drops their forks in the restaurant. People listen, right?
Yeah. That was a great commercial.
Yeah, well, it's really good because I remember.
Yeah.
I ended up working with them in 86 or 85. And shortly thereafter, working with them and getting my Series 7, which is your general securities exam, that gives you the license to actually do trades. It's a federal license. I ended up, well, not I ended up, but the market ended up crashing.
Yeah.
In 1980, I think it was 87, Black Monday they called it. And so I was kind of in a unique position because I hadn't yet developed my clientele. People were leaving the business, so you ended up, yeah. So the bottom line is that I did spend 10 years on Wall Street. When I say Wall Street, I'm talking about in New York City, working for E.F. Hutton, and then E.F. Hutton was taken over by Shearson Lehman, and you know the story.
Yeah.
All these different firms evolved and morphed into other firms. And I did 10 years there, and while there, I learned a lot about the financial markets, still dealing with people.
What did you do though? Were you managing people's money and making trades and stuff?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I was making trade. I wasn't on the floor of the market. I wasn't a trader on the floor, but I would be what they call in those days a stockbroker, which nowadays they call them financial consultants.
Yeah.
So you basically were responsible for people's money.
Okay.
So you would acquire clients, and you would help them grow economically.
So you did that for 10 years. Why make the career change at that point?
Really interesting. I actually had an opportunity during my time with the brokerage house, being on Wall Street, to go with DEA. But there was a freeze. And that freeze caused me to lose my position. There was no hiring for years. I want to say it was probably in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So then I said, well, because I remember I left my job on Wall Street, figured I'm going to go with DEA. I never got a letter, but I felt like it's in. They told me everything looks good and we should hear from us soon, and you know. So I said, okay, I'm looking forward to this.
But you had actually left your job?
I left my job.
Okay.
And then I ended up without a job. So I ended up getting involved in some, you know, so now, and I just bought a house too. That was kind of funny. Talk about a little stress, right?
Yeah.
No, but what happened was then I ended up getting involved in some, I worked on some political campaigns in New York. I just said, I got to get up and go. And I actually, I'll be honest, I worked for a Democratic candidate named Paul Tsongas out of Massachusetts. And I always thought this candidate was an idealist, and I really enjoyed listening to him because while I was in college at American, I did spend a semester on Capitol Hill working as an intern. And I got to attend a lot of these hearings, and I heard Paul Tsongas speak. Socially progressive, but fiscally conservative. You know, so it was a rare combination, and I enjoyed his thoughts. So I went to work for his campaign. It was short-lived. He lost. Bill Clinton won. And then from that campaign, I went back on Wall Street.
Okay.
I said, DEA's not going to call.
But was it always just DEA, Michael? Did you ever think
Everybody was frozen.
But did you apply for any other positions?
No, I didn't. And I'll tell you why I picked DEA.
Okay.
Which is the question.
Yeah.
While I was on Wall Street, I had a client, an elderly woman. Her son was basically had the power of attorney over her account, and he was a DEA agent. I wish I remembered his name. Super nice guy, John something or other. He was based out of Hartford, I think, or New Haven. DEA agent. So him and I are talking, and he asked me, I knew of DEA, but I didn't understand the money laundering part of it. And he was asking me questions about, hey, just want to know, can you explain to me what this is? And I told him what it was. And he says, did you ever think of working for DEA? And I said, I've heard of them. I'd like to. He says, and I tried, but they had a freeze. He goes, so you have an application in? I said, yeah. So he made a couple of inquiries, and if my memory recalls, it was frozen. But him and I kept in contact for a few years. Ever since then, lost contact. But when the hiring process came back and the freeze thawed out and they went out hiring,
Yeah.
I had a phone message on my hotline in my place in Jersey. There was no cell phones in those days.
Yeah.
A guy named Joe Love, super nice guy, from headquarters DEA, leaves me a message. Mike, this is Special Agent Joe Love from DEA. We'd like to have you apply again for DEA if you're still interested. So I'm thinking, this is BS, right? Who's playing this game with me? Because a few of my friends knew my story. So I called the number back, and it was him. And I said, sure, let's do it. And now I'm like around 35.
Yeah.
So I went through the whole process again. But apparently there was a lot of guys and women like me that were in a position where they were going to get hired and they got a freeze, and that was it. So we ended up, my class, 96, ended up going to Quantico. Never forget, it was in July. And I knew D.C., but boy, Quantico was a lot different than D.C., and it was hot. Oof. It was in July I went down there. So it was for 4 months. And we only had 16 people in our class.
Wow, that's a small class.
They were all small in the beginning. And they were all small in the beginning because everybody in these classes tended to be older, and they were part of the freeze.
Okay.
Which is interesting because the government actually worked. It actually had your application, And they saved it, and they called all the candidates to see where they are in their life. Do you want to continue this process, or can we eliminate you from the pool?
How long, let me ask you this, how long did you initially put your application?
About 4 years.
Okay, so it was 4 years. So not 10 years, but it was still a significant amount of time.
Yeah, and I was getting concerned about, because at that time, well, they just increased the age limit.
Yes.
It used to be 35.
Yeah.
And if that was the case, I would have missed it. They moved it to 37. I don't know what it is now.
Yeah.
And I was at 36.
So tell me about that. So first of all, you're in a class with maybe a little bit older people.
Yeah.
But how is it? I mean, you're not 21 years old, and I'm not saying you're an old man at that point going through, but how is it going through? You've had all this life experience, you're working on Wall Street, and I know they're running a militaristic academy.
Yeah.
How is it?
It was great.
Okay.
I mean, you had to get used to it.
Yeah.
But I had a great roommate. He was a former customs agent and a pilot. So I really appreciated his knowledge of law enforcement. So he was the oldest, and I think I was the second oldest. But I was number 2 in the fastest. Anyway, as far as runs. But no, but we had it took a lot of reconditioning and just getting used to things.
Yeah.
But I was looking at, okay, this is temporary. You know, 4 months from now,
Yeah.
I'll be doing whatever we can do.
Yeah.
So, and plus, I'll be honest with you, these are cops, and they like to bust chops, right? So I'm the guy on Wall Street, who's this guy, and I totally respect it, and you go along with it, and you have a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. But it must also help. I mean, on the one hand, it's like, okay, I'm a little old and I've got this stuff. But on the other hand, you've got all this life experience, and you can't take things too personally at that point because you've got all this experience behind you. Okay, so you graduate. Where do you go?
I go back to, well, here's how it worked in those days.
Okay.
16 weeks, and around week 12, they have you come into this dinner. I feel like I was in the NFL draft or something. I go into this dinner, and all these guys are there from from the DEA, but they're like recruiters or people that came out from other field divisions.
Really?
And you're having a dinner at one of the restaurants within well, actually it was the FBI Academy we were at.
Okay.
And I learned 2 days before then that I was going to San Diego. You had your wish list, and San Diego was one of my wishes. I couldn't go back to New York or Newark because in those days they wanted you to go away from where you came from. So what ended up happening was I ended up getting this trip, well, not trip, but I got posted in San Diego. And so I met the person from San Diego who was going to be my field training agent, my FTA. And we ended up hitting it off. But then he ended up going to another position. And then I have a buddy of mine who I'm still friends with today. He was my FTA, field trading agent. So I went back to Newark for about 4 or 5 months, and then I went to San Diego, and everything started.
What do you work on? What's the first group that you're in San Diego?
I was actually in an RO in San Diego, up in Carlsbad. And I tell you what, I was really fortunate to have some old BNDD agents, Bureau of Narcotics, Dangerous Drugs. That was a precursor to DEA. And a lot of them were Vietnam veterans, and they really, I knew that I didn't know this job, but I felt like I want to embrace these guys, and figuratively, so that I can understand how the job works. And I was just fortunate to have these guys with a lot of experience in this RO, because typically, as a new agent, you go to a field division.
Yeah.
But I was sent to the RO, and it worked out well.
Yeah, so being in an RO, I'm assuming you get to work on all sorts of different cases.
Yes, we did. And funny story. So being from the Northeast, the ocean's on your east, right? Come out to California, It's on the other side. So in those days, there was no GPS, or you had to use a Thomas guide. So you had to Xerox the old, copy the Thomas guide, highlight where the L1 is and the L2. So I go to, I'm on point, and I'm calling, okay, the driver's heading east, and I'm following. And then I'm, okay, he's made a left, and people are going, where are you? I says, well, I'm with the, I'm with the S1. We're following. He goes, no, you said east. I said, oh, what a mistake. So I felt really terrible because but we ended up getting back on track. Then after that surveillance, some of the guys that were from like Pennsylvania and the East Coast, they said, hey, it happens to all of us, So that was one of my first experiences on the West Coast.
So in the RO, are you predominantly dealing with older agents then? Are you are you the youngest?
Yeah, I would say, well, good question. Youngest by career years, yes. I was probably one of the older ones there, aside from management.
Yeah.
So a lot of the guys were maybe my age, but they've been on the job for 5 to 8 years.
Yeah. Huh. Do you, at any point in the beginning, or maybe throughout your career...
Am I okay to drink this?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all good. Do you do any undercover?
I did some.
And what did you think of that? Did you like it? Did you not like it?
I liked it. I thought it was, when you first do it, it's cool, A little story. Normally when you're an undercover agent, you're not the case agent. You tend to be a person coming in and helping out with a case, because the case agent is the one that's really running the case. And
Right.
you can't be the undercover and be the case agent at the same time, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So I went on this undercover, and I went to an old agent. It was my first undercover. And I went to an agent who did a lot of undercover work, and I said, hey, I'm going undercover tomorrow. You got any suggestions? Because I know things can go bad. This is like serious stuff, right? So he says, well, one thing I can tell you, your weapon, don't use a holster. I go, because I had a little baby Glock. I go, what do you mean don't use a holster? He goes, bad guys never use holsters. Cops use holsters. A general comment, but I said, hey, I took that to heart.
Yeah.
And, So anyway, I went on the undercover, and it was kind of interesting. I played the boyfriend of one of the female agents. She was super. She ended up being my boss later in San Diego. She was also from the East Coast. And we did this undercover where we were doing a buy of drugs. And I had the money, and they've already met the bad guys. So this is the first time they met me. So make a long story short, whenever you're bringing money to an undercover deal, you have to make sure you're not going to get ripped off. So you have to look for counter surveillance to see if when you leave with the drugs, somebody's not going to stop you. And what have. So bottom line is that I'm waiting on the outskirts by myself, waiting to get the word to come in with the money, and I get a call on the radio. Hey, you got a small Honda Civic with 4 guys, young guys in the car. They seem to be following you. I said, okay, I saw that. I said, okay, thank you. Bottom line is that the deal ended up going down, and we took everybody down. I mean, in other words, we arrested everybody. Here's what happened. The deal was they saw me. And at the time, I was big, and I was very ethnic looking as an Italian. I think I had a jogging suit on at the time. And the guys in the car had weapons, and their job was to rip me off with the money. But word got back somehow that this guy, me, is a mobster. And I was talking to the bad guy too at the time, and I guess they thought I was from some New York crime family. I don't know what prompted it, but the guys in the car, and they weren't that old, they were in their mid-20s, they went away to a nearby gas station and ditched all their guns. My guys on the surveillance team followed them in, took them down.
Wow.
So I'm in here in the hotel, and I told my girlfriend, this is what's going on. I don't know about those guys. I said, but there's a counter surveillance, and our guys know. I told her that in confidence. Bottom line, everybody got taken down. And the word was that their goal was to scare me and take the money. And honestly, I was lucky, because you think back on it and you say, oh God, it's a good thing I had an accent, that scared, I don't know, it looked big. But that could have easily gone sideways, where out of nervousness, they could have done something to me. So that was my first experience with undercover. It happened right up here in Carlsbad.
Wow.
And then I did some other things overseas. But I wouldn't call myself an undercover agent.
Yeah.
It just, I actually liked making the cases.
Yeah.
I loved putting together investigations that could, cross borders. I felt like I was a director in a movie. And the movie script was the actual operation. And as the case agent, you're able to have people positioned.
Yeah. When you went through your career, did you find cases that you really enjoyed? What did you gravitate to?
I ended up gravitating through to financial investigations. When I say financial investigations, obviously there's a drug nexus in all our cases.
Yeah.
But I would look at, okay, how are they moving money?
But why was that? Was that because of your background?
It was, okay, good question. It was because of my background. I could see the value, because if I was a bad guy, I wouldn't care so much about the product, because I can always get product, but it's that money that is that's where, I can actually experience the fruits of my labor. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I found that to be intriguing, and I liked the idea of going after the money side, because I just thought, just from my own thoughts, was that if you're going to really cripple somebody and try to dismantle somebody, take away their power, which is the money.
Yeah.
And then we had Karen Tandy come into to the DEA when I was in Mexico, and she basically started promoting the financial side. So it just took off from there. And so I kind of got labeled the money guy, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, and I enjoyed it too. It was just, I found it like kind of cool to put together the puzzles, because when you really think about it, you got a key of coke, it's illegal, or fentanyl, it's all illegal. You go to jail, or you're going to get arrested, depending on your defense attorney and all that. But you're going to spend time in custody. You got money. Money's legal. Money is inherently legal. So what I found was the cool thing, and the challenge was to dirty up the money, as they say. What makes this money dirty? Because other than that, you're not going to have any. So I found it like a puzzle. And that's what I like to do.
Did you, okay, so from the RO, Carlsbad, did you, any other groups within?
Yeah. Carlsbad, I did time in Carlsbad. And then I wanted to get to the field division, and I actually put in a request to go to the asset removal group, which was not the group you want to go to when you're doing when you're trying to get your 13.
Right, right. So why did you want to go there?
Because I felt I did some talking. First of all, the supervisor of it was the undercover girlfriend.
Oh, okay, okay.
And she was cool. I really liked her, and I felt I could learn from her. The other thing was, I felt that, when they say it's like a contra in the market, when nobody wants to buy it, that's the time to buy it. Well, I felt like nobody sees the value here. So I could make some value out of this and kind of stand out.
Yeah.
So there was some personal ego involved in it.
Yeah.
And we ended up doing we created a wiretap out of that group, and we actually did some cases.
Wow, out of a
Yeah.
asset removal
Yeah,
group.
and I got to understand the idea of seizing assets too. So it was an education to me too.
Yeah.
And then from that group, I did my time there. I got my 13. And as they, I'm not sure if the audience will understand what that means, but became a senior special agent.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting Mexico. Now, I wanted to go overseas.
Okay.
So that was another thing why I wanted to go with DEA, because DEA, I felt, from what I read, had the largest international presence in law enforcement. And I felt that that was a great opportunity, because if you're going to, in my opinion, if you're going to be a federal agent and you have the ability to go overseas, sometimes you don't because of family reasons or what have you, go overseas because you see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So I actually took a trip on my own to Colombia and Mexico because I wasn't sure which countries to go to. So I went on a vacation in Bogota and Mexico City. Didn't speak any Spanish at the time. I was still learning on my own. And I liked both the countries. I said, I don't know which ones to go to. Then I talked to one of my old RO, old B&DD guy. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he knew I had this interest to go overseas. He says, don't go to Colombia, go to Mexico. I go, I'm just curious, why? Colombia's passé. Mexico was where all the actions are going to be. So I went.
Was there any thought about, you're looking at Mexico, you're looking at Colombia. Did you ever think about Europe? Why those countries?
Yeah, because my parents, my mother said, you should go to Italy, because that's where my grandparents. I said, no, what's going on there? First of all, I think, well, how can I say this? I don't think I had the right rabbi to go to Europe.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
But I really thought that the action would be, as a DEA agent, you want to go where the action is.
Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah.
So that's why I was looking at Colombia, but I was a little, it's passé, Mexico City, Mexico was the place to go. So I did a TDY in Mexico. I actually went into the office when I was on vacation. I spoke to some guys. One of them was assigned to San Diego once before, so he was appreciative that I came down. I did a TDY there, and when they had an opening, I got assigned.
Did you speak Spanish at the time?
No.
Okay, so do you learn Spanish?
Couldn't even count to 10.
Do they send you to language school?
They sent me to language school. I actually took it on my own to learn some Spanish. I went to a local community college in San Diego. I took basic Spanish, and just to have an understanding of it. And I tried my best to learn the language. And my Spanish was never that good. But I made do, and I always made sure I had somebody who spoke better Spanish than me when we were out. But over the time, I still practice, and I've gotten a lot better. But it was, and to me, that was life-changing.
Yeah. So how was it? You get transferred to Mexico. What are you working on there?
When I was in Mexico, I'm trying to think of just for the audience's sake, and you already know this, when you go to Mexico or any foreign assignment, you don't really have the power of law enforcement in these countries. Now, some countries give you a little bit more power than others, but you're carrying a badge that says U.S. on it, and you're basically in a diplomatic status, and you're basically a guest in these foreign countries. So what I was working on is just getting to know who I need to talk to and how to understand the lay of the land in this country, because you have to be careful. And a lot of times you will be working with United States investigations that have a tie to Mexico, and the idea is, what can you do in your post to help the U.S. Facilitate their investigation,
right?
Maybe even expand it to identify targets in Mexico. So that's what you do. You can initiate investigations in Mexico, but they're going to be tried in the United States, so you really have to be aware of, there's limitations when you're in a foreign assignment. So, and obviously with my background, people knew my background. I would be called if there was any questions about Casa de Cambios in Mexico. I would find out who in the Mexican government, not who, but what agencies in the Mexican government ran their financial investigations. Can we open some doors with these organizations, agencies, to see if we can get some connections, counterparts to work with us, to help us facilitate money laundering investigations. Obviously the venues in the United States, but there's usually is cross-border transactions with Mexico. So I did my best to establish contacts with other agencies that typically DEA did not connect with.
How was it working in Mexico? Did you have to deal, was there any level of corruption that you ran across?
Yeah, personally, I would say not, but obviously there's corruption, and this is, I guess, as they say, the grease that allows the wheels to move. But the thing, though, that I learned in being on the job and dealing with my counterparts, they were really good people there that wanted to do the right thing. But the system is just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's something that I learned to understand. I'm not defending the system.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that you can't, to quickly judge somebody, I don't think is the right thing to do, because you need to walk in their shoes. But there were some things that the Mexican government, I think, ended up fixing while we were down there. And there was a new administration that came in where we had a really good relationship with the Mexican government at that time. And we were able to make some pretty cool cases.
How long were you there? The first time?
The first time, yeah, I was in, because I did 2 tours in Mexico. The first time as an agent, I was there for about 4 years.
Okay, so
I promoted out.
Okay, why you promote out, you go back to San Diego.
Go back to San Diego.
Why'd you promote?
Oh, I want ego. I'll be honest with you.
Ego, okay.
I mean, that's what happens. You know, you're trying to do the right thing. You want to progress.
Yeah.
And I felt like if you get to a point where you can actually help make decisions from a management position, I felt that you can make the agency even better.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people say, hey, I did it because I had a crappy boss and I knew that I could do it better than him, or...
Yeah, I could say that. But, you know, I'll be honest, it was just the ego, because I felt like I could do it. But regardless if I had a good boss or a crappy boss, if I had a good boss, I say, hey, I'd like to take some of the traits from the good boss and apply it to myself.
Yeah.
But I just felt that that was the route I wanted to go, and I never felt like I worked when I was with DEA. And quite honestly, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that'll claim I never did work. But
okay, so. But when you promote to a GS, do you ever have it in your mind going, okay, whether it's ego or not, I'm going to promote, but I'm not going to stop here. One day I want to be a SAC. What's the...
Oh, yeah. It's funny you say that. Yeah, exactly. And here's the other thing, too. So I promoted, I'll get to that question in a short time.
Okay.
I promoted out, went back to San Diego. And by the way, we did a really nice, interesting case in Mexico that actually targeted some of the Casa de Cambios, and we were looking at correspondent relationships with one particular bank in California. It involved 4 countries. I don't want to do war stories, but that was actually a very, I guess you can say, pivotal case in my career, because it comes into play down the road. So I did my 4 years, go back to San Diego as a GS, and they had me running the financial investigative group.
Of course.
Which was fine.
Yeah.
And I go to San Diego, I'm saying, okay, I've been here before. And a lot of times it's tough to go back to where you were an agent, now you're a boss, a middle management.
Yeah.
So, but I went back, and I wanted to go back to San Diego. I liked the weather. And the first the first thing I had presented to me as a GS was that somebody in my group was parking in a disability spot in the parking lot, and which prevented the person who was disabled to park there. So the question is, why are you parking in this spot with the G car? Well, I had an operation, and I have a disability card. I said, well, so I'm thinking, boy, this is my first decision as a GS, right? So I sat down like King Solomon, I thought about this. I said, okay, listen, don't park there, because you're claiming you're on disability or whatever you are. Basically, you shouldn't be working. So stop being disabled, let the person park there, or if you want to continue this, that's fine, but we're going to have to put you on time off, so to make sure that you're feeling better. Person was fine the next day. So I don't know if we're going to keep this in the funny.
That's a good story, though. I mean, there's just idiocracy that you have to deal with periodically.
This is the point. Whenever you think of DEA, FBI, Secret Service, you think of these noble professions and all that. You're still dealing with human beings. You're still dealing with people who have certain intricacies about them, certain foibles that you got to address. So this is something that I tried my best, So I did a few years in San Diego as a GS, and I missed Mexico a lot, I'll be honest with you. I really enjoyed my time in Mexico. It was life-changing to be living in a culture. I just felt that I quickly just started liking it. I never been to Mexico prior to this. And I just really enjoyed the culture, the people, the whole ambiance of the bigger city, too. So I actually put in for Mexico again, which is unheard of because I just got back. But apparently, this was a time when Mexico was getting very dangerous, and a lot of people weren't putting in for it. So I ended up getting it again. So after spending a couple of years, I go back to Mexico as a GS, running a financial group there.
How many people do you have working under you in Mexico?
It was about 10.
Okay.
We had a lot of agents. The office grew a lot.
Yeah.
And during that time while I was there as an agent and became a GS, during that like 2002 to 2010, we also opened up several ROs, border offices and what have you. So our presence really grew in Mexico. And we were able to do some really cool cases. And I was in Mexico, doing my thing, and I had a great group of guys and women. And some of the cases that I did allowed me to get invited to speak at conferences with bankers and regulators. Now, when I say bankers, I'm not talking about the sales side of the bank. In banking, financial institutions, when I say banks, they have something called compliance. These people are not the people that are part of the revenue generating side of financial institutions, right? They want to make sure that their financial rails, for lack of a better term, their business platforms are not being corrupted by bad guys, drug traffickers, terrorist financing, what have you. So as a result, compliance works to make sure that the customers that are onboarded, that are brought onto their, as a customer, new customer, meet certain expectations, that you know who they are, be it if it's an individual or a legal entity. So, and I don't want to go into details on that, but the point I'm making is that I was allowed to go speak at these conferences. They were called money laundering conferences. And this was after, by the way, 9/11. And we started getting our relationships with the financial side, the private sector grew because of the Patriot Act and what have you. So they were looking for people to speak, and I would be asked to speak, or my agency would say, go speak. So I would talk about, you talk about cases, you talk about how law enforcement views certain things and what have you. You answer questions, and so that's it. It's something different.
Yeah.
And you're out there. So in Mexico, now I'm a supervisor. It's getting around close to 2010. Been on the job for almost 15 years. Wachovia, a bank, was taken down. When I say taken down, they were targeted and had a deferred prosecution on them for being involved in money laundering for some Mexican drug traffickers. Not to talk war stories, but the bottom line is that Wachovia was a large banknote business in Mexico and Latin America, which means that they were responsible for retrieving U.S. dollars from Latin America and bringing it back to the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. And they would get paid for that. Well, they lost that. They got out of the business, and who defaulted was Bank of America. And Bank of America at the time, this is right after the financial crisis,
yeah.
So you can't look at things in silos, right? Bank of America just purchased Merrill Lynch, so they became bigger. And as a result, Bank of America now became the number one banknote provider in Latin America. Plus, they had all this exposure now in Latin America through Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch is a brokerage house, what they call wealth management, as opposed to banking. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking with Bank of America on this new title they received. I went to Charlotte with some bosses of mine, and they came to me in private and said, "Do you know anybody who can run Latin America for us, because we're now making it a separate region?" And I told them, yes, I got a few people that I have contacts in the banking business in Mexico, and I'm sure we can get you somebody. And then they told me they were more thinking of me. So I was like a little shocked, and I instantly said no, because I love what I was doing, and get up in the morning and it was a great life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So bottom line is that I ended up saying no, but after further consideration and discussion with friends and people that I respected, I ended up changing my mind. I did the math, see if this would be the right move. It was a tough move emotionally, but career-wise, it was a good move for me because it opened up a world to me.
So you had a couple questions for you. So you had 15 years on the job. You could have gone another 5 years, but I'm assuming that at that point, not only is it a good career move, but they're probably paying you pretty well. It's a financial move, right? I didn't ask you this in the beginning, though. When you started as a stockbroker, financial advisor, whatever you want to call it, and came over from DEA, was that a pay cut?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. On the one hand, it wasn't financial wasn't a reason to join DEA, but on the other hand, going with B of A, part of it was a financial.
Well, let's put it like this. I didn't do it because of the finances.
Okay.
My concern was, let me back up. When you're younger, you don't really think about retirement, right? You don't think, you want to do cool things, right? And that's what I wanted to do with DEA. And I knew DEA, I would take a pay cut, but you would end up making money.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
But I always look at, let me back up. When you say compensation, I don't look at compensation as money. I look at compensation in life. Money's part of it. Mm-hmm. Quality of life, doing cool things, and other, which could be, I don't know, as you live in life, other becomes, you never knew other existed, or this. So my point is that I always looked at compensation, not just in the money, because if you're just following the money for a career, you're going to end up being disappointed.
Yeah.
I just felt that if making a difference, doing the right thing, being able to put your head in the pillow at night and going to sleep and feeling like I can't wait to go to work the next day.
Yeah.
You can't give me enough money to take that away, because. Going to work with a clear head and knowing you're doing the right thing is just, in my opinion, just it's rewarding. It's, as they say, it's priceless.
Had you reached a point on your career with DEA, 15 years? Do you feel a little stale on the job?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. I actually knew I'd be heading to D.C.
Okay.
But here's something where I was going to bring back. Mm-hmm. You said, did you want to become a GS because you wanted to go to the ASAC and this and that?
Yeah.
I was one time doing the math on my career plan, it's in my head, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. Then I realized I'm old. DEA, I only had like 5 more years left.
Yeah.
I can't do all this in 5 years.
Yeah.
So the most at my career, I would be a 14, my same rank, in headquarters, supporting cases on the outside, and being more or less a spectator. And then I would get a pension and figure it out.
Yeah.
The fact that I had so little years left also made me understand, hey, in the private sector, you don't have to retire at 57. Matter of fact, they actually like the fact that you have this experience. So that was another reason why I took that position, because I knew that I would be capped off when I go to headquarters. Because nobody's going to promote you out of headquarters if you have 1 or 2 years left.
Right.
They're going to say, stay in headquarters, ride it out, and enjoy your life.
Right.
If you go into headquarters in your 40s, late 40s, maybe 50, different story.
Yeah.
But if you're going there at 53, 54, and you only got a few years left, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So in that sense, that allowed me to make the decision even easier. And again, you want to look at where things are going, not where things are.
Right. So you decide to leave. You're working for Bank of America. What are you doing? What's your job?
Okay. I was the title was a managing director of financial crimes and compliance. And I was one of the guys that was working not on the revenue side, where you're looking to get customers and increase your revenue base. We were what I would call the person that would take the punch bowl away from the party when it got out of hand. Compliance, financial compliance, is basically the cops of the bank, of any financial institution. The financial compliance is I'll just call it compliance to make it simple. They're the ones that make sure that there are onboarding procedures in place so that when the institution wants to take on new customers, be it individuals, legal entities, what have you, you have a mechanism in place that can do due diligence or enhance due diligence depending on those type of customers. Are they high risk or not? And it doesn't just stop there. What also happens is once you have made the decision to take these customers on, and some of these customers could be like trusts or legal entities, that if you're looking for the actual beneficial owner, it could take a lot of work to find out who is the actual two-legged animal that has control over these accounts, right?
Yeah.
But once you finally made a decision to bring them on, then you have to have the right programs in place, monitoring of the transactions. So you want to make sure that not only do they stay, that they are good, that they stay good and true, that they don't get corrupted over the years, that things don't happen where all of a sudden you see these, what they claim they're going to do X, then all of a sudden they're doing Y and Z in their transactions. Like, well, what's going on? This is not what you said. So what we ended up, what my role was, and I was, a managing director, so I oversaw Latin America, which at that time included about 6 countries. We had to make sure that each of these countries, each country is a sovereign nation, they have their own rules and regulations. We had to make sure that they adhered to the best practices to make sure that the Bank of America or Merrill Lynch platforms were not compromised by bad guys.
Did you ever get these questions or these calls? Because I got to imagine DEA knows they're your friends or whatever else. And banks are really they're really strict with their information. Did you ever get the calls from buddies of yours going, "Hey, dude, I need some information. Can you just get it to me?" Yeah.
No, I know. No. Well, honestly, I really didn't get those calls. I actually had some, this is police, cops.
Yeah.
I would get a call. Hey, Mike, I need to get a CD. Can you get me a CD? No, I mean, I would meet with agents, and I like to understand the new typologies, because I don't want to ask them what's going on in investing. I mean, it's kind of hard because you're so used to it.
Yeah.
And I was in Mexico, and it was kind of weird because I went from diplomatic status, even though it was limited in Mexico, I still had a black passport. Now I was naked, so to speak, and I had my blue passport, and I was what they call an expat.
Yeah.
So,
any worry about the position that you're in? Maybe they don't look at it, but any worry about the position you're in being kidnapped?
yeah, that was a concern.
Really?
I made some inquiries, but I basically decided that it's not going to happen.
Okay.
I decided that, not the bad guy. No, but no, that was something that ran through my mind, especially for the fact that what I used to do.
Yeah.
But it all worked out.
Yeah.
I'm here. But getting back to your question, I would spend time with law enforcement a lot of times, not finding out what they're doing for investigations, but I like to understand typologies, so I can pass it on to my quant guys,
right,
who basically have the algorithms at the time and set up, how to monitor financial transactions. And I would also get calls from guys about, explain to me how this product works or how this service works. Now, if I couldn't explain it, I would get the right person who could. But it was more like a sharing of information, but not financial information where you're sharing state secrets or customer secrets.
Yeah.
It was more like on typologies, or how does correspondent relationships work.
Okay.
Things like that.
Okay.
So, and I felt that was the right thing to do, because a lot of times law enforcement, they don't really understand banking. I mean, they understand money laundering, and they understand how to do an operation and arrest people, but it's to understand how money flows cross-border to correspondent relationships. Sometimes to understand that can help you focus your investigative progress. And it gives you also investigative direction. So I would, whatever I could do to help the cause, still, I did.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question for you. I've always been wondering about this, but so now I can ask you as a DEA agent. Now I can ask you as a former Bank of America, person. So, what would you do in this situation? I'm working on this case. We go and seize bank accounts, and I know this because I actually end up interviewing the teller at this bank. And bad guy comes into the bank the morning that we're doing all the raids and we're seizing assets. And he goes in and says, "I want to pull out all my money." And the banker, the teller, can actually see the money being frozen as they go. And they're able to...
Was that just a coincidence, or was there somebody tipped off?
I think it was that this guy was in a different state. I think somebody had called him and went, "Holy crap, we're doing search warrants and everything else." So he rushes to the bank. So I know this from talking to the bad guy and the teller. They're able to pull out $125,000 before that money is seized.
They did that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
My AUSA, I don't know what it was. Whether you're afraid of the bank, I could never figure it out. I was really, really mad because he never wanted to pursue it. He never wanted to go after the money. It's like, look, not only I have the teller actually admitting to what she did, I have the bad guy saying, what.
So it was pulled out in cash?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, taking $125,000 in cash, that's a lot of cash.
Yeah.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money, but to have banks with that much cash to come in and out of the blue, normally you got to call ahead and make an arrangement to take out that kind of money. Maybe they had it.
I'm just wondering from your Bank of America hat, technically, I mean, I got it. Well, I mean, obviously I know what happened because they told me what happened. I mean, is that illegal? Is that wrong? I mean, you know this is happening. You're watching it happen.
Well, that's where I'm a little confused because a teller is a teller. They don't really have access. They can see accounts, but I don't know if the actual computer screen, and again, I don't know the details.
Yeah.
I don't know if the computer screen actually shows this account will be frozen in 10 minutes. It's either frozen or it's not.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not defending the prosecutor, but it sounds to me that he had the right to take it out because it wasn't yet frozen.
Right.
Again, I'm basing this on very little information. I'm just playing the banking side.
Yep.
The teller is not a police officer. She was probably scared stiff.
Yeah.
Did she know this was a bad person?
Probably not. But
then she has no reason to stop him.
But at least the conversation that I'm having with her and I'm having conversation with the bad guy, she knows that these accounts are being frozen, and they specifically said it was like a game to see how much money we could pull out of these accounts before they were all frozen.
She said that?
She said that.
Yeah, that doesn't help her. Apparently she didn't have an attorney when she talked to you.
No, and I felt bad for her. You know, she's some little 18, 19-year-old kid. And I didn't want to get her in trouble. I don't know, nothing ended up happening to her. I was just more mad that nobody wanted to do anything about this.
Well, here's the problem with financial investigations, to be honest with you, from what I've seen. And I've done training all over the world. You know, again, we talked earlier, money is inherently legal. So you really have to make the case to say that it's dirty money.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously did make the case where at least it was frozen. It wasn't forfeited yet, it was frozen.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it was frozen. Was it criminally? No, it probably was. Was it criminally? Was it civilly? Who knows? But my point is that if he'd left the bank with cash, you might have ended up seizing it anyway, because where was he going to bring it? I mean, the question would be, now, where did you take?
Yeah.
You know, so this is a question that I need more information to answer it correctly.
Okay.
But I can see the bank's side, or the teller's side.
Yeah.
Now, a compliance person would have said you should not have done that.
Right.
And quite honestly, the teller should have went to her branch manager, escalated it, and said, hey, listen, we got an issue here.
Right.
Then the branch manager could have stepped in, who typically has been on the job for many years and would have known how to handle this.
Yeah.
Or she could have made the calls.
Okay. I was always.
Yeah, you know, and I don't know the relationship between the teller and the bad guy. Who knows what they were doing? So, but sorry, I couldn't solve the case.
It's okay. So, Michael, what are you doing now? Obviously, you can't. You said there's only so much biking. There's only so much messing around what you can do. So, what do you do now?
Well, when I left the bank in 2015, you know, I left it not through my own decision, but, well, in a way it was. They were doing some restructuring, and I had the opportunity to go into other areas, and I just didn't want to do it. I just took the payout. So now I'm basically roughly 55, 56. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then I had a personal tragedy that happened. Don't want to get into it, but you know, I lost somebody close to me, and I'm like, okay, let me take some break here. So I was fine. I mean, as far as you know, economically, dealing with some wounds, but a buddy of mine reached out to me from headquarters DEA. He said, hey, did you ever look into doing this volunteer work? I'll give a plug for the NGO. It's called Financial Service Volunteer Corporation, FSVC, based in New York. They do some really good work out there. And they have presence throughout the globe. And what they do is they get senior executives, either from the financial institutions, and now they've been going more with law enforcement too. Most of them are retired guys, or even people on the job still, in the private sector. And you offer your time, where they pay for your expenses and your airfare and all that, and you go out to these developing countries, and you basically provide training or educational sessions or panel discussions on promoting anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing efforts and the value of that. Mm-hmm. How it's valuable to your country to maintain this type of efforts. And obviously a lot of the countries, they don't speak the language, but they have it's translated in real time. And it really became rewarding in a different way, because I'm looking at it from a global perspective, not just U.S. centric. When I go to these places, I make sure that I'm clear that, yeah, I'm an American, I was with DEA, I was with Bank of America, but I'm coming to you with ideas that are more global standards, not how they do it in the United States. Happy to discuss it, mm-hmm. but we're trying to get it done from a global perspective and address your parameters and your jurisdiction. So I've been doing work with various NGOs, done work with the United Nations, done work with State Department, done work with NGOs like this FSVC. I've done some private sector work, and yes, I've even done some work with some defense attorneys. I'm very selective on that, but yeah. I've done some work with that, basically where they've already pled, but re-interviewing them to bring out, especially if it's a money laundering case, to make sure we can get the most amount of information to make them valuable to help, with their sentencing. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. So I can pick and choose what I want to do. Yeah. It's very rewarding. I'm actually going to Albania at the end of this month. Wow. Yeah, I've been there before. And I've actually had some time in some of these countries where I lived maybe 3 or 4 months. Wow. Doing these projects. Like I was out in Abu Dhabi for a while. I spent a lot of time in Jordan, Sub-Saharan Africa, Liberia, and Middle East. Wow. And some, let me see, nothing really in Asia yet, but Eurasia. So, but that's what I've been doing. Okay. All right. One question before I ask you my final question. We talked a little bit about this. I'm kind of a watch nerd, right? Our age, I don't see too many people wearing Apple Watches, and I like real watches. So I saw you came in. What watch are you wearing? What watch does a DEA agent / Bank of America representative compliance guy wear? Well, I don't know if this is what I wear. Okay. I like Panerais. Okay. Why? They're big. Uh-huh. So you can see them. Yeah. I just like the way they look. Okay. I don't know. Okay. You want to try it on? No, I mean, you showed it to me earlier. That's a nice heavy watch, that's for sure. Yeah. I was impressed with that watch. So, yeah. Okay, so the last question I have for you: can you look back on your career from when you started with DEA to maybe even now? Did being in law enforcement affect the way that you see people in society? It's a good question. Well, I will tell you one thing. When I drive by parking lots where there's a McDonald's or a strip mall, I instantly think there's a deal going down. And I feel like if I go behind the strip mall, I'm going to find a group that's debriefing before they do their bust. Quite honestly, it happened to me one time. Yeah. I just was driving, I went behind it, and it looked like I didn't go to them, but they had their vests on. So. Yeah, yeah. But, so it does alter your perspective on things. As far as people, I will tell you, I've learned that life is not black and white. I learned that there's a lot of gray, and I've also learned that good people make bad decisions. That to judge somebody on a decision or several decisions isn't fair. It's kind of made me just open my eyes up to realize that, you know, life is great, but it's not simple. And as the more you learn about other cultures, and at least what I learned about other cultures, and you see people in really bad positions, and you ask yourself what made them do this, and you know, during the interview process you realize that it was a split-second decision that changed the course of their life. And if they just said no, they would not be in this predicament.
Yeah.
And it could happen to anybody. I'm not saying that anybody could do things bad, but it's just funny how life is. So I guess in answer to your question, and just to summarize it, I've just learned that life is not simple, and you can't say it's black and white. There's just so much gray, so many tonalities of gray in it, and you have to embrace it and just be aware of that. And I think it just makes you a person that becomes a little bit more sensitive, a little more open.
Do you feel like you're jaded at all from the job?
You know, sometimes I am, but I catch myself, and I also remind myself that, hey, there's, you know, yes, there are truly bad people out there, don't get me wrong. I'm not this Pollyanna type of person. But I do find that, I don't know if I'm jaded. That's a question you should ask friends of mine rather than me. But I do think that I ask a lot of questions, and especially when it comes to when I see people with certain things, instantly in the back of my mind, how do they afford it, right? And I did that a lot when I was in Mexico, when I had counterparts showing me things. But you know, but then again, getting back to the original question, I wouldn't call myself jaded. I think I'm just more aware. But yes, every now and then you can catch yourself making judgments, but you want to put yourself in check.
Yeah. Thanks for the interview, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. I hope I added value to your mission.
Absolutely. It was really, really interesting.
Okay, buddy.
Thanks.
Take it easy.
All right. You too.